Okay, so I need to start this deep dive with a bit of a confession. I mean, I have been preparing for these biology exams for months now.
Right.
And I've been running through the syllabus, doing the practice papers, highlighting the textbooks, until the pages are practically translucent. And I thought I had a pretty solid grip on the material.
Which you do. You're a sharp student.
Well, thanks. But I was just rereading the introductory text for chapter 14.
Hmm.
You know, the chapter literally just titled Ecosystems. And I hit this mental wall. A good wall, though. It was a massive paradigm shift.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What happened?
It forced me to realize that I haven't just been studying biology wrong. I've been looking at the entire architecture of nature through completely the wrong conceptual lens.
That is a bold statement. But honestly, as someone who has spent the last 15 years or so mentoring students through this exact curriculum, guiding them toward the most rigorous medical entrance exams out there, I can tell you that I know exactly the paragraph you are talking about.
You do?
Oh, absolutely. When a student actually stops skimming that introduction and actually digests the epistemology of what the authors are establishing there, it changes the entire trajectory of their study.
Yes, it really does.
It's the exact moment they transition from rote memorization to actual scientific comprehension.
Exactly. So if you are listening to this right now, you are probably in the exact same boat I was. You've memorized the word ecosystem since middle school. You can probably recite a standard definition on autopilot.
Word for word.
Right. But today, our mission is to completely dismantle that autopilot. We are going to look at the incredibly dense, profoundly precise language of just the first few sentences of chapter 14. Because this text isn't just giving us a list of vocabulary words.
No, it's handing us a cognitive tool.
A cognitive tool, exactly.
Right.
It is explaining the fundamental logic of the entire syllabus.
And that is the perfect way to frame it. The opening of this chapter is arguably the most elegant piece of compression in the entire textbook. The authors have essentially hidden the thermodynamic and structural secrets of the entire biological universe inside what looks like standard introductory filler.
Which everyone skips.
Exactly. Our goal today is to extract every single ounce of meaning from those sentences. Because if you, the listener, can understand the structural blueprint provided right here in this introduction,
then the rest of the chapter makes sense.
More than makes sense. The subsequent 8 sections of the chapter stop being arbitrary facts you have to memorize, and they become inevitable logical conclusions that you can simply deduce.
So let's cut straight to the core idea. The text begins with a single foundational assertion. It states an ecosystem can be visualized as a functional unit of nature.
Functional unit?
Yeah, it was that specific phrase, functional unit, that triggered my breakthrough. I realized I had always thought of nature as a geographic location, like a noun.
A place on a map.
Exactly. A forest is a place with trees. A lake is a hole filled with water. But the text explicitly rejects that. By calling it a functional unit, it's demanding that we look at nature as a verb.
A verb, I like that.
It's a thermodynamic engine. It's a processor. It's a network where the components actively execute a job.
The transition from noun to verb is exactly the conceptual leap you need to make. Let's really interrogate the etymology and the logic here. Why do the authors use the word unit?
Well, like in physics, right?
Yes. In physics, we use a unit like a joule to measure energy, or a newton to measure force. A unit is a standardized boundary that allows the human mind to quantify and analyze something that would otherwise be an overwhelming continuum.
Right, because the universe doesn't actually have Sharpie borders drawn on it. If you walk out of a forest and into a grassland, there isn't a solid brick wall dividing them.
It's a continuous blend.
It just slowly fades from one to the other.
Precisely. And the text addresses this epistemological problem head-on. It notes later in the introduction that the entire biosphere is simply too much big and complex to be studied at one time.
Yeah, too big to comprehend.
Think about the processing power of the human brain. We are fundamentally incapable of calculating the simultaneous real-time biological and chemical interactions of an entire planet. It is computational chaos.
So we had to invent the box.
We did. The concept of the ecosystem was invented as a solution to human cognitive limits. We draw an imaginary mathematical box around a specific set of interactions, and we say, for the purpose of our analysis, we will treat the inside of this box as a discrete, self-contained machine.
That is what a unit is in this context.
Exactly.
That makes perfect sense. We needed a conceptual scalpel to slice the infinite complexity of the Earth into manageable chunks that we can actually read. But let's look at the other half of that phrase. functional.
A critical distinction.
Because a painting has boundaries, right?
Mm.
A museum diorama has boundaries, but neither of them is an ecosystem.
Because they lack function. A diorama is static. The taxidermy wolf does not exchange carbon with the plastic trees.
Right.
To satisfy the definition of a functional unit, there must be an ongoing dynamic process. The gears of the machinery must be turning. If you freeze time, the ecosystem technically ceases to exist in that moment.
Because the ecosystem is the process, not just the physical materials.
Exactly.
Okay, so if the ecosystem is the process, what exactly are the gears doing?
Yeah.
The text provides the exact anatomy of this machinery in the second half of that opening sentence. It says that within this functional unit, living organisms interact among themselves, A and D, also with the surrounding physical environment.
That conjunction is everything.
Yeah, and I want to push back on this a little bit, or at least play devil's advocate, because this is where I realized my previous understanding was terribly shallow.
Go for it.
Living organisms interact among themselves. That's the obvious part, right?
Mm-hmm.
Predators hunting, prey, symbiotic bacteria, and gut birds competing for nesting space. I honestly used to think that was the whole ecosystem, just biology interacting with biology.
And that is a classic pervasive trap. It is a trap that examiners exploit ruthlessly year after year.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. A student will see a multiple choice question asking them to identify an ecosystem, and they will immediately look for the option that lists the most animals. But a collection of animals interacting is merely a community. It is not an ecosystem.
Because of that critical conjunction in the text?
And
also with the surrounding physical environment. This is the two-way street that changes everything. It's not enough to study the fish swimming around each other. You have to study the fish interacting with the abiotic factors.
The non-living components.
Yeah, the dissolved oxygen levels,
Yeah.
the pH of the water, the photon penetration of the sunlight, the thermal gradients.
The physical environment is the stage, and the biological organisms are the actors, but we must elevate that analogy.
How so?
In a human theater, the stage is a passive construct. Hamlet doesn't change the molecular composition of the wooden floorboards by delivering a soliloquy.
Right, the stage just sits there.
But in an ecosystem, the stage and the actors are locked in a relentless reciprocal feedback loop.
Okay, can you give a concrete example of that reciprocal loop? Because I want to make sure I'm not just memorizing the phrase to a street without visualizing the actual mechanism.
Certainly. Let's look at a terrestrial soil matrix.
Okay.
The physical environment, the parent rock material, the mineral content, the temperature dictates what kind of pioneer plant species can initially take root there. The stage dictates the actors.
That makes sense.
But once those plants are established, their root systems secrete organic acids that actively dissolve the rock.
Oh, wow.
When they die, their organic matter alters the moisture retention capacity and the carbon profile of the soil. The actors have fundamentally redesigned the stage.
And so now the stage is different.
Yes, this new stage now selects for a completely different set of secondary organisms, which will in turn further modify the soil chemistry.
It's a continuous negotiation. You literally cannot separate the biology from the chemistry and the physics.
You cannot.
Like if you try to study a frog in complete isolation, divorced from the mud it burrows into to survive a drought, or the specific ambient humidity it requires for cutaneous respiration, you aren't studying ecology. You are just doing anatomy.
Exactly. The interaction with the physical environment is what flips the switch. It is the spark that turns a biological inventory into a functional unit. If that interaction ceases, the engine stalls.
Which brings me to one of the most conceptually difficult parts of this introduction. Or at least it was for me.
What's that?
Well, if the ecosystem is defined by these interactions, by this continuous negotiation between the living and the non-living, how do we know where to draw the boundary of the box?
The boundary problem.
Right, because the text states that an ecosystem varies greatly in size, from a small pond to a large forest or a sea. When I really stopped to think about that, it felt like the text was breaking its own rules.
How so?
How can a unit of measurement vary so wildly? An inch is always an inch. A minute is always a minute. But an ecosystem can be a puddle or the entire Pacific Ocean.
This is a beautiful piece of cognitive dissonance, and it forces us to realize that ecosystem is not a spatial metric. It is not a unit of area or volume.
What is it then?
It is a unit of relational logic. It is scale independent. In mathematics, we would call this a fractal property.
A fractal property. Let's break that down for the listener. A fractal is a pattern where no matter how far you zoom in or zoom out with a microscope or a telescope, the fundamental structural rules remain exactly identical.
That is precisely what the text is communicating. The rules of thermodynamic transfer and material cycling do not care about physical volume.
Okay, let's visualize that.
Imagine a single drop of pond water suspended on a glass slide under a microscope.
Just one drop.
Inside that microvolume, you have living organisms, let's say a paramecium and some photosynthetic cyanobacteria.
And they are interacting among themselves. The
Yeah.
paramecium might consume the cyanobacteria.
Yes, and are they interacting with their surrounding physical environment?
Absolutely. The cyanobacteria are capturing photons of light, penetrating the droplet, and they are exchanging dissolved gases with the microscopic water volume. The paramecium is reacting to thermal changes in the water.
Then, by the strict, uncompromising definition provided in the text, that single droplet of water is a complete, fully realized functional unit. It is an ecosystem.
Wow. Okay.
Now, zoom out completely. Look at the entire Arabian Sea. You have billions of tons of phytoplankton interacting with oceanic currents, deep water upwelling, and solar radiation being consumed by massive trophic networks ending in apex predators like orcas.
The gears are exponentially larger. The volume of biomass is staggering. But the architectural blueprint of the engine is totally unchanged.
They're exactly unchanged.
The inputs, the interactions, the outputs, they map perfectly onto that single droplet of water.
This is the threshold concept that separates top-tier students from the rest. When you start obsessing over the physical size of the geographical boundary and start looking exclusively for the presence of the required interactive rules, you have mastered the concept.
That is huge.
And this leads us directly into one of the most high-yield concepts in the entire syllabus, and correspondingly one of the most dangerous exam traps.
You're talking about the biosphere.
I am. Let's look at the exact wording in the text. Many ecologists regard the entire biosphere as a global ecosystem, as a composite of all local ecosystems on Earth.
I want to pause on that word, composite. Because if I am taking a standard geography test and they ask me to define the biosphere, I am going to say it's the physical layer of the Earth where life exists.
The crust, the surface, the atmosphere.
Right. It's the space between the sterile rock of the deep lithosphere and the freezing vacuum of the upper atmosphere. It's a geographical zone.
And if you write that definition on a rigorous biology entrance exam, specifically in the context of ecology, you will likely lose marks.
Why? Because it's too spatial.
Because the textbook explicitly defines the biosphere mathematically, not just spatially.
That's what we mean by composite. It's an aggregation.
It is an equation. Biosphere equals the sum total of every local ecosystem on the planet. It is not merely a container that holds life. It is the grand macro-level functional unit that emerges when you network every single smaller functional unit together.
So you add them all up.
Yes. If you take the drop of water and you add the Arabian Sea and you add the Amazon basin and the Saharan dunes and the hydrothermal vents at the bottom of the Marianas Trench.
You're compiling all the little ends.
Exactly. You add up the energetic processing of every single local engine, and the resulting superengine is the biosphere.
So an examiner might try to bait you into defining the biosphere purely as a physical location, but the sharp student knows to look for the answer that emphasizes the accumulation of interactive functional units.
Precisely. To use an analogy, if I ask you what a car is, you could say it's a metal box taking up space in a parking lot. That is spatially true.
But it's not a functional definition.
Exactly. But if you say it is a composite of a combustion engine, a transmission system, an electrical grid, and an aerodynamic chassis operating in sequence, you have demonstrated an understanding of its functional reality.
And the text demands we treat the biosphere as the ultimate composite machine.
Exactly.
But the text also immediately acknowledges the practical impossibility of studying the whole car at once. It says, since this system is too much big and complex to be studied at one time, it is convenient to divide it into two basic categories.
We have to impose a taxonomy on the chaos.
We must divide to conquer. And the great division the authors offer is remarkably binary at first glance, but profoundly complex when you scratch the surface.
What are the two primary buckets they provide?
Terrestrial and aquatic, land and water ecosystems.
Simple enough.
But the text gives us specific examples for both. Under terrestrial, it lists forest, grassland, and desert. I want to inject some friction here.
Yeah.
I understand why we need to categorize things, but grouping a rainforest and a desert together under the exact same structural umbrella seems almost counterintuitive to me.
Why is that?
Well, a rainforest is defined by extreme moisture, hyper-competition for sunlight, and massive, dense vertical structures. A desert is defined by a lack of moisture, blinding sunlight, and sparse, horizontally distributed life. They are polar opposites. Why do they belong in the same bucket?
It is a fantastic question, and answering it reinforces the golden rule we established earlier.
Right.
Why are they in the same bucket? Because the functional unit is defined by interactions with a specific type of physical medium.
The stage.
Yes, the stage. In a terrestrial ecosystem, regardless of the extreme variations in climate, the fundamental physical stage is constructed of a solid lithospheric substrate,
Mhm.
soil or rock, interfacing directly with the atmospheric gas mixture.
Oh, I see. The stage is made of the same core materials, the ground and the air.
Correct. The variables, the vectors of temperature, precipitation, and wind speed swing wildly from a desert to a forest. Those extreme physical variables force the biological actors to evolve radically different adaptations.
Right, so the cactus and the mahogany tree look entirely different.
But they are both solving the exact same fundamental puzzle: how to extract nutrients from solid ground and exchange gases with the open atmosphere. The baseline medium of the terrestrial stage remains constant.
That clarifies it perfectly.
Yeah.
The baseline physical architecture dictates the category, not the localized weather patterns.
Precisely. Which brings us to the other bucket, the aquatic ecosystems.
Right. The text lists pond, lake, wetland, river, and estuary.
Let's analyze that list. The authors did not just casually throw out oceans and lakes. This is a carefully curated spectrum designed to show the incredible plasticity of the aquatic functional unit.
I noticed that. You have the still water systems, ponds and lakes, lentic systems, right?
Correct.
But then the inclusion of a river, a lotic system. A river is a functional unit that is literally moving away from itself at all times. The physical environment, the water is relentlessly flowing downstream. How does an ecosystem maintain its structural integrity as a unit when the stage itself is constantly washing out to sea?
That is the genius of the dynamic equilibrium. The physical molecules of water are indeed transient, but the parameters of the physical environment, the velocity of the flow, the oxygenation from the tumbling rapids, the shading from the riverbanks, remain relatively stable at a given coordinate.
So the conditions stay the same even if the actual water is new.
Yes. The biological organisms, the salmon or the benthic macroinvertebrates, have adapted their interactions to exploit that continuous flow. The flow itself is the machinery.
And then there's the estuary. That one feels like the ultimate stress test of the ecosystem definition.
Why is that?
Because an estuary is a transition zone. It's where the fresh water of the river collides with the salt water of the ocean. That means the physical environment is not just moving, it's violently fluctuating.
Daily.
Yeah, with every single tidal cycle, the salinity, the temperature, and the turbidity swing back and forth. It's an environment of constant physiological stress.
Yet it functions. It processes energy. It cycles nutrients. In fact, estuaries are often some of the most highly productive functional units on the planet. By including wetlands and estuaries in this brief introductory list, the textbook authors are explicitly warning the student.
Warning them about what?
Do not think of ecosystems as perfectly stable, isolated, unchanging bubbles. They can be messy, chaotic transitional spaces characterized by extreme environmental oscillation. As long as you have the biological actors negotiating with that physical chaos, you have your unit.
Speaking of messy boundaries and the rules of the game, we had to talk about the final sentence of that paragraph. This is the sentence that completely shatters the idyllic David Attenborough documentary view of nature that most people hold.
Read it.
Crop fields and an aquarium may also be considered as man-made ecosystems.
Listener, if you have a physical copy of the textbook in front of you, I want you to mentally highlight, underline, and put a massive star next to that sentence.
Is that important?
If you are preparing for a high-stakes exam, you are looking at one of the most frequently deployed traps in the entire field of ecology.
Let's role-play this out. Why is it such a devastating trap?
Because it preys on a cognitive bias. Most students conflate the scientific term ecosystem with the aesthetic concept of pristine wilderness. A standard multiple-choice question will ask which of the following represents an ecosystem. The options might be A, an untouched alpine tundra, B, a deep-sea hydrothermal vent, C, a monoculture wheat farm, or D, all of the above.
And 90% of people are going to immediately disqualify option C.
Instantly.
They'll say, well, a wheat farm isn't an ecosystem, it's agriculture. It's an industrial human operation. We planted genetically modified seeds, we drove heavy diesel tractors over the soil to plow it, and we spray synthetic fertilizers on it. There's nothing natural about it.
That is exactly the internal monologue that leads a student to select the wrong answer. Now, as the sharp student who has just internalized the true definition, I want you to dismantle that argument. Why is the wheat farm an ecosystem? Apply the textbook's rule.
Okay, let's run the checklist. The golden rule is that an ecosystem is a functional unit where living organisms interact among themselves and also with the surrounding physical environment.
Step 1. Does a wheat farm have living organisms?
Yes, obviously the wheat plants, but also the vast microbiomes of bacteria and fungi in the soil,
Yeah.
the earthworms, the insect, pests, the birds that prey on the insects. It is teeming with biology.
Step 2. Do they interact among themselves?
Absolutely. The mycorrhizal fungi form symbiotic networks with the wheat roots. The aphids consume the sap of the wheat, acting as primary consumers. The biological interactions are intact.
Step 3. Do these living organisms interact with the surrounding physical environment?
Yes. The wheat plants are actively capturing solar radiation, pulling water from the irrigation lines in the soil, and exchanging carbon dioxide and oxygen with the atmosphere through their stomata.
Therefore, logically, mathematically, undeniably, it is an ecosystem. It perfectly satisfies every single parameter of the functional unit.
But I want to push back again just to make absolutely sure the logic holds up. What about the human extraction?
What do you mean?
Well, in a natural ecosystem, a plant dies, decomposes, and its nutrients cycle back into the soil. In a crop field, at the peak of its growth, massive human machines roll through, harvest the biological mass, the grain, and physically remove it from the system entirely. We ship it across the world. Doesn't that sever the functional loop? Doesn't that break the engine?
This is a spectacular point of friction. It forces us to distinguish between a closed system and an open system. Ecosystems, thermodynamically speaking, are open systems.
Meaning they aren't sealed off.
Correct. They require constant input from the outside, and they experience constant output to the outside. The fact that humans are extracting a massive volume of biomass simply alters the vector of the output.
So it's just an artificial form of predation or degradation.
Exactly. Think about a flock of migratory birds. When they eat millions of insects in a forest and then fly to another continent, they are physically removing biomass and nutrients from that local system.
Wow, I never thought of it that way.
The human harvest is just a technologically scaled-up version of that exact same dynamic. Because of this massive extraction, the crop field requires massive artificial inputs, human-applied fertilizers, to prevent the system from collapsing.
But while it is running, while the wheat is growing and photosynthesizing it, is an operating ecosystem.
Yes, the fundamental laws of biology do not possess a moral compass that disqualifies human interference.
That brings us to the aquarium example, which might be even more conceptually aggressive.
Oh, it's brilliant.
Just picture it. A glass box sitting in someone's living room. A human synthesized the glass. A human filled it with chemically treated tap water. A human bought an exotic fish bred in a facility, dropped it in, and then plugged a mechanical filter into an electrical wall outlet.
The pinnacle of artificiality.
It is the absolute pinnacle of artificiality, yet the text classifies it alongside the Arabian Sea.
Run the checklist again.
Living organisms, the fish, the plants, and crucially the bacteria that colonize the mechanical filter.
Interacting with themselves.
Yes, the bacteria consume the ammonia produced by the fish waste.
Interacting with the physical environment.
Yes, the fish are extracting dissolved oxygen from the water that the mechanical pump is aerating.
The machinery activates. It is a functional unit.
Even though if the human forgets to sprinkle flakes into the water for a week, the entire system completely collapses and dies.
Yes, its fragility or its dependence on an external human actor for energy input does not negate its status while it is functioning.
Because natural systems have external dependencies too.
Exactly. If the sun suddenly stopped shining, the Amazon rainforest would collapse in days. Both the aquarium and the Amazon are dependent on external inputs to drive their machinery.
The source of the input, a human hand or a celestial star, doesn't change the fact that internal thermodynamic processing is occurring.
Exactly. If you deeply understand this rule, you become immune to the testmaker's traps. You evaluate the system based on interactions, not aesthetics.
Okay, we have thoroughly established the boundaries of this functional unit. We know what it is, how it scales, and how to categorize it, regardless of human interference. Now we need to look under the hood.
Time for the mechanics.
Yes. The second paragraph of the introductory text transitions from the taxonomy of the ecosystem to the literal mechanics of how the engine runs. It provides what I consider the ultimate flowchart for all of biology.
Read the exact phrasing for us.
We will first look at the structure of the ecosystem in order to appreciate the input productivity transfer of energy food chain web nutrient cycling and the output degradation and energy loss.
This single sentence is a Silhouette map, a philosophical treatise, and a set of thermodynamic blueprints all rolled into one.
I want to highlight the connective tissue here. Structure, in order to appreciate.
Why does that stand out to you?
Because the text is making a profound argument. It is saying that biological structure does not exist randomly. The anatomy of the system, the specific arrangement of producers, consumers, and detritivores, only exists to facilitate a job.
Form follows function.
Exactly. Form follows function. And that function is a three-phase sequence.
Let's break down the phases.
Phase 1, input. The text calls it productivity. You can't have a functional machine without plugging it into a power source or pouring fuel into the tank. Before any biological interactions can occur, there must be a mechanism to import energy into the boundary of the unit.
And for the vast majority of ecosystems on Earth, that input is solar radiation, and the mechanism of capture is photosynthesis by the primary producers.
The plants are the solar panels. That is the productivity. But once that fuel is captured and converted into chemical bonds into glucose, it cannot just sit there.
A battery sitting on a table is not a functional unit. An ecosystem is not a storage facility. It is a processing plant. The energy must be forced through the system.
Which brings us to phase 2, the transfer. The text lists of food chain/web and nutrient cycling. How does the energy move from the solar panels to the rest of the machinery?
Trophic cascades.
Right. A grasshopper consumes the plant tissue. A frog consumes the grasshopper. A snake consumes the frog. An eagle consumes the snake. That trophic cascade isn't just a list of who eats whom. It is the physical pathway of the fuel moving through the biological architecture. The gears are turning.
And here we arrive at the most crucial, mind-blowing realization of this entire deep dive. This is the moment where we have to shatter the illusion of the perfect circle.
Yes.
I want you to read the exact phrasing regarding the final phase of this sequence, phase 3.
Phase 3, the output degradation and energy loss.
Look incredibly closely at the verbs and the nouns the authors chose. In the transfer phase, they refer to nutrient cycling. But in the output phase, they explicitly mandate energy loss.
It's not a cycle anymore.
It's not. This dichotomy is not an accident of drafting. This is the fundamental physical law of the universe asserting absolute dominance over biology.
This was my second massive breakthrough, and it honestly felt a little bit existential.
Existential how?
Well, I grew up with this pop culture idea of the circle of life. It paints nature as this perfect, harmonious, perpetual motion machine. The antelope eats the grass, the lion eats the antelope, the lion dies and decomposes into the soil. The grass uses the soil to grow, and the cycle continues flawlessly forever.
It is a beautiful narrative, but thermodynamically, it is a lie.
Because while the physical atoms, the nutrients like carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus do indeed cycle in a loop, the energy flowing through those atoms does not. It is a one-way street ending in a steep cliff. The text explicitly says energy loss.
An ecosystem is absolutely not a perpetual motion machine. It is entirely subservient to the second law of thermodynamics, entropy.
Let's play out the physics of that degradation, because I really want the listener to grasp why it's inevitable. Why can't the frog just absorb 100% of the grasshopper's energy?
Because the grasshopper didn't just sit perfectly still its entire life waiting to be eaten.
It had a life to live.
Exactly. The grasshopper used the energy it got from the plant to hop around, to power its respiratory system, to undergo cellular division, to chirp, to find a mate. All of that biological work produces heat.
And that heat radiates out into the physical environment and dissipates into space. It is gone forever.
Gone forever. When the frog finally eats the grasshopper, only a tiny fraction of the original energy, usually around 10%, is still locked up in the chemical bonds of the insect's physical mass.
It's like pouring a pitcher of water into a smaller cup and then pouring that cup into an even smaller shot glass.
Yeah.
But the catch is that your hand is violently shaking the entire time. Every single time you pour, you spill 90% of the water onto the floor.
That is a phenomenal, visceral analogy. The physical cups themselves, the carbon atoms, the nitrogen, those can be picked up, washed, and passed around the table forever. That is nutrient cycling.
But the water inside the cups, the usable energy is splashing out, soaking into the floorboards and evaporating away. That is energy loss.
And because of this inescapable output, this relentless degradation, the ecosystem is a desperate, hungry machine. It constantly requires new input from the sun just to avoid total collapse.
If the sun shuts off, the water stops pouring into the first cup, but the shaking hands keep spilling what's left until the whole system grinds to a halt.
The textbook is describing the tragic, mathematically rigid reality of life. It requires constant, relentless input just to maintain its structural integrity against the inevitable tide of thermodynamic decay.
And if we bring this right back to the listener, this isn't just abstract theory. This is exactly why you, the listener, had to eat breakfast this morning and why you will have to eat dinner tonight.
A perfect personal application.
Why couldn't you just eat one massive, perfectly balanced meal when you were 10 years old and just cycle those nutrients internally for the rest of your life? Because your body is a functional unit. Right now, as you listen to this, your brain is burning glucose to process our words. Your heart is pumping, and your body is radiating heat into the room around you.
You are actively experiencing degradation and energy loss.
You are the machine, and you are constantly spilling water. You must continuously seek new input.
It's the unifying law of ecology. And what is so masterful about this introduction is that the authors didn't just mention this three-step sequence as a fun fact. They used the input-transfer-output paradigm to architect the entire remainder of the chapter.
They outline the whole thing.
They tell us what we are going to study, and then they deliver it in exactly that logical sequence.
That brings us to our final major section, the roadmap of relationships. The text explicitly lists the 8 sections of the chapter right at the end of the introduction. I used to look at the chapter outlines and let my eyes glaze over. It's just like a random table of contents. But after our discussion, looking at this list is like looking at the blueprints of a factory. The sequence is entirely deliberate.
Let's trace the blueprint. Let's show the listener how logically the syllabus is constructed. The chapter begins with 14.1 structure and function and immediately moves into 14.2 productivity,
which maps perfectly onto phase 1 of our engine. 14.1 sets the stage, defines the physical parameters and the biological actors, and then 14.2 measures the input. Productivity. How much solar fuel is this specific factory capable of capturing in a given year?
Precisely. You must measure the fuel before you can track its usage. Once the fuel is acquired, we move to the internal processing. But notice how the authors split this up. We get 14.3 decomposition, followed by 14.4 energy flow.
This is phase 2, the transfer. Energy flow is the straightforward path, the food webs who eats whom. But why does decomposition get its own massive section right before it?
Because decomposition is the ultimate bridge. It is the unglamorous microscopic grinding gear that connects the energy flow back to the nutrient baseline.
Right.
The detritivores, the fungi and bacteria, are extracting the absolute last remaining drops of energy from dead organic matter while simultaneously unlocking the chemical cups, the nutrients, so they can be reused by the producers. It is the hardest working component of the transfer phase.
Following that, we get 14.5 ecological pyramids.
How would you conceptualize the pyramid based on our conversation?
The ecological pyramid is just a visual, graphical representation of my shaky pouring analogy. It's the geometry of thermodynamic loss.
Perfect.
The base of the pyramid is massive because that's where the initial input of productivity sits. But every step up the pyramid gets violently narrower because 90% of the energy is degraded as heat. The pyramid shape is the physical shadow of the second law of thermodynamics.
A flawless deduction. Now we introduce the dimension of time. 14.6 ecological succession.
This section addresses the fact that the factory isn't static. Over decades or centuries, the functional unit changes and ages. A barren rock field slowly becomes a mossy tatch, which becomes a grassy meadow, which eventually matures into a climax forest.
The machinery is constantly upgrading and replacing its own components over time, altering the physical stage at every step.
And through all of these structural changes, through all of this succession, one thing must remain constant, which is covered in 14.7 nutrient cycling.
The conservation of mass. The recycling program.
This is the deep dive into carbon cycles, phosphorus cycles, nitrogen cycles. This is tracking the physical cups that are being passed around the ecosystem, the atoms that never leave, contrasting so sharply with the energy that constantly escapes.
And finally, the capstone of the chapter. 14.8 ecosystem services.
The ultimate so what? Why do humans care? This section looks at what this massive planetary composite of biological engines actually provides for our species. Clean air, water filtration, the pollination of our global food supply, the regulation of the climate.
These are the incidental byproducts of the thermodynamic engine just functioning normally, but they are the services that keep humanity from going extinct.
When you map it out like that, taking a macro view of sections 14.1 through 14.8, the elegance of the curriculum is undeniable. These are not isolated, arbitrary facts designed to torture a student. They're an exact step-by-step diagnostic manual for a biological engine.
If a student understands this overarching map, they aren't just memorizing biology, they are diagnosing nature.
Diagnosing nature. I love that phrasing. Okay, we have covered an immense amount of conceptual, philosophical, and biological ground based on literally just 2 paragraphs of text.
We really have.
We've talked about epistemology, fractals, thermodynamics, and exam traps. It is time to synthesize this and lock it down.
Listener, if you have been making notes or if you've just been letting this wash over you while you commute, I need your absolute focus right now. Here's what you must remember from this deep dive. I am going to provide you with the 5 critical memory anchors. If you carry nothing else into your exams, carry these.
Ready?
Anchor 1. You must remember that an ecosystem is fundamentally a functional unit. It is a process, a verb, not a static painting. It absolutely requires a reciprocal two-way interaction between living organisms and the physical environment. If there is no physical interaction, you are looking at a community, not an ecosystem.
Two-way street. Got it.
Anchor 2. You must remember that the scale of this unit is a cognitive illusion. An ecosystem is a fractal concept. It can be a microscopic drop of water, or it can be a massive ocean. Do not let spatial dimensions confuse you. The rules of thermodynamic interaction remain identical regardless of the size.
Size doesn't matter?
Anchor 3. You must remember the strict mathematical definition of the biosphere. It is not merely the geographic layer of the Earth that holds life. It is the grand composite, the aggregated sum total of every local ecosystem on the planet. It is the macro engine.
The sum of all parts.
Anchor 4. You must remember to completely ignore the natural wilderness aesthetic trap. Crop fields, wheat farms, and living room aquariums are entirely valid ecosystems. Why? Because they perfectly fulfill the functional requirements, living things interacting with each other, and a physical medium. The presence of human interference does not rewrite the laws of biology.
The biggest trap of all.
And anchor 5. You must remember the sacred thermodynamic sequence of the biological engine. It begins with input productivity, proceeds to transfer food webs and nutrient cycling, and ends inevitably in output degradation and energy loss. The atoms cycle in a perfect loop, but the energy flows in a one-way street, constantly lost as heat.
Those anchors are razor sharp. Okay, listener, here is your sticky summary. The high-speed 60-second synthesis of everything we just mapped out. The universe is way too infinitely complex for human brains to compute, so we slice nature up into manageable conceptual boxes called functional units or ecosystems.
Nice and concise.
We categorize the chaos mainly into terrestrial systems governed by soil and air and aquatic systems governed by fluid dynamics. We treat every single one of these boxes, whether it's the Sahara Desert, a flowing river, or an artificial glass aquarium, like a thermodynamic machine.
Keep going.
That machine must capture fuel from the outside world. Through productivity, it must grind that fuel through the intricate gears of food webs and decomposition. And because of the brutal laws of physics, it inevitably bleeds that energy out as degraded heat. It is a desperate, brilliant engine of life, constantly burning, constantly needing new fuel, operating on a scale from a single raindrop to the entire biosphere.
A flawless, comprehensive summary.
To wrap this deep dive up, we always like to leave you with a final provocative thought, something to push the boundaries of what we've discussed today. We spent a lot of time defining an ecosystem by the delicate reciprocal interaction between living things and their physical environment, the stage and the actors.
We did.
And we established that the entire biosphere is just one massive mathematically linked composite of all these local units. So what happens to the macro engine when humans artificially rapidly alter the physical inputs across the entire globe simultaneously?
The ultimate variable.
If we systematically alter the baseline temperature and carbon concentration of the physical environment everywhere at once, we aren't just redecorating the stage. We are forcing every single local biological engine on Earth, from the microbial droplet to the terrestrial forest, to suddenly run on entirely different physical parameters.
Changing the rules of the game.
Next time you look at a puddle on the sidewalk or a farm field from a highway, ask yourself, where is the energy entering? Where is it bleeding out? And what happens to the machinery when the fundamental physical rules of the stage change without any warning?
That is not just an ecological question, that is the defining survival question of our era.
And it all starts with understanding a functional unit. Thank you for joining us on this exploration, listener. Keep questioning the definitions, look past the vocabulary to see the machinery underneath, and we will see you on the next deep dive.